All right, I'm going to kick things off. So welcome everyone to our National Coastal Resilience Fund workshop in partnership with Throwe Environmental. So because we have some folks who aren't part of our network, I'm just going to give a quick background and talk a little bit about what we do as a network and how that relates to this fund. And then I'm going to hand it over to Kyle to really talk about the grant itself, the parameters, eligibility, etc. And then you'll have some time in groups to start ideating around project proposals and get some feedback from the consultants at Throwe Environmental. So we are a group of practitioners, thinkers, land managers that really focus on forested natural areas, that section of the urban forest that looks and feels like the woods and has some really unique benefits. So just to kind of ground us, and you'll see I have another picture here of beautiful Inwood Park in Manhattan, a forest with old growth trees and incredible functioning ecosystem within the island of Manhattan, which is kind of traditionally known as a really dense concrete place where there's not a lot of green space. But in fact, as we all know, there are incredible thriving forests within the city. So the Forest and Cities Network is so proud to represent 17 cities across the US, as you can see in this map, and I think many of you will see yourselves represented here. And we are a network of practitioners who really work on collectively sharing resources, peer-to-peer learning, conducting science and research to better understand the benefits of these forested natural areas, and also collectively advocating for more funding, like we'll discuss today, to really protect and support these vital forests that are within the city landscape. So what do we know about these resources? They're a huge resource. They actually make up 68% of total parkland across the 96 most populous cities in the US. And they're under threat. We also know that there's been a decrease of almost 4% in the past 5 years of this natural areas parkland. They're a huge resource, and they're also incredibly valuable. So we know they make more cities more livable, they contribute to climate change solutions, and they really provide ecological benefits across the city. And in light of the grant that we'll be discussing today, I just want to highlight and remind you all what a key nature-based climate solution forest patches and cities are. You know, they two of the past studies that we've conducted as a network have really focused on quantifying the benefits that forests provide in storing and sequestering carbon. And through our research, we found out that these forested natural areas store and sequester 3 times more carbon than just street trees. We also, as many of you know, are currently processing data about the cooling benefits of forested natural areas, and have found that these natural areas are often several degrees cooler than the shade of a street tree and many degrees cooler than an area with no shade at all. And we're really looking forward to scoping a new study this year that's going to quantify the stormwater interception benefits of forested natural areas, which will really relate to the focus of the grant that we'll be discussing today. Forests and cities also provide really vital habitat for wildlife, fish, birds, rare plants. So I actually stole this photo array from our partner, James Duncan in Miami, and this is showing some of the rare flora and fauna that can be found in the unique forest ecosystems and pine rockland ecosystems in the city of Miami. So these forest patches have become sort of a vital hotspot to conserve these rare and endangered plants and animals in our cities. So I'm not going to go too deep into this because this is really Kyle's domain, but the National Coastal Resilience Fund, or NCRF, is a grant program that really focuses on restoring and expanding natural areas to minimize the impact of climate change, such as storms, sea level rise, and other coastal hazards. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of context by talking about the ways that some of our network cities are already doing work to reduce coastal hazards through restoration and caring for forest and natural areas. So I'll just bring you back to our first gathering in 2019, when the city of Houston talked a lot about the way that they are planning for climate change and addressing stormwater impacts through riparian restoration. And after I'm done presenting, I can share a link to this published case study that they wrote, but here you can see a photo. This was following Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and they've really begun creating new forests and restoring riparian areas through forest restoration to mitigate these stormwater impacts, and in turn have also engaged the community and created new habitat for wildlife. Another case study we heard about that really hits home with the work that can be funded by this grant is in Philadelphia. And some of you who attended our network gathering in Seattle back in November will remember that we heard from the city of Philadelphia on how they were constructing stormwater wetlands to really protect and conserve drinking water, but also basically act as a nature-based stormwater treatment wetland, while also bringing new native plants and restoring habitat within the city of Philadelphia. So that's another one. I can drop the link and you can read a little more about that project from their case study. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Kyle. That was a little context on what we're doing in our network, and Kyle is going to really get into the nitty-gritty of the National Coastal Resilience Fund.
Thank you so much, Sophie. A really great introduction to start this conversation off. Looking forward to seeing everyone once we go into the breakout rooms a little bit later. And really just glad to be having this workshop today. I first connected with Sophie in September of last year at a national conference. So it's good to kind of see all this finally coming together. So great to be with you all today. And I am going to share my screen and we can jump right into it. So it looks like you should be able to see that. If there are any issues, please just feel free to unmute. But otherwise, if folks could just stay on mute, unless there's a question, of course, there will be some time for dedicated questions at the end, though. So as Sophie mentioned, we will be talking today about coastal resilience funding that specifically could benefit the communities that are in this forest and cities network. And this will all be focused around the National Coastal Resilience Fund that's offered by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And I'll be referring to that as NCRF, just because that name becomes a mouthful after you keep saying it. So NCRF is the name of the game today. And just for a quick introduction about myself and kind of my team, my name is Kyle Gray. I'm the manager of programs engagement at a consulting firm based out of Rhode Island called Throwe Environmental. And our team serves as field liaisons for the National Coastal Resilience Fund. So that being said, we are not employees of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We're actually kind of the intermediary between the foundation and the folks that would actually be applying for this grant. So that's actually a nice position to be in. We're able to hear all of the good ideas and the potential projects that folks are thinking about, and we can bring those back to the folks at the foundation to help get some feedback and to help kind of steward certain ideas that we feel are really competitive, towards actually applying and putting together a strong proposal. So that's one of many projects that our team works on. You'll also see that we have a lot of focus in climate resilience in general, sustainable financing and investment, as well as leadership development and policy and governance. So quite a bit of work that we have. If there's any interest in our kind of full range of projects, of course, feel free to reach out or drop a question in the chat. So for today, we will start with a pretty basic overview of the National Coastal Resilience Fund. We'll try to give you as much information, soup to nuts, about the program. I'll also give you some information about how to connect with our team as field liaisons, and I'll highlight some specific opportunities for folks in this network. So that'll take about the first 45 minutes or so to an hour of today's meeting. We'll take a short break, and then we will be able to actually engage with one another in breakout rooms that we'll organize for the second 45 minutes or hour. And that's where you'll be able to ask questions and talk to other folks who are thinking about project ideas. So that is our roadmap today. So to start with, let's dive into this program. So the National Coastal Resilience Fund, or the NCRF, is administered by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and it has been since it was first established in 2018. So we are currently going on, I think that makes it the 6th round of funding or the 7th round of funding at this point. And as a whole, the program has really grown in recent years. It initially was about a $30 to $40 million program, but because of all the money coming from BIL and all of those other federal pots of funding that came through with all this new legislation over the past year or two, that level of federal investment has now gone up to upwards of 140 million. And that was about how much money was available last cycle and how much we anticipate will be available in the 2023 cycle, which will be starting very soon. At its core, the program supports these 3 elements that I've got underlined and bolded right in the center of the screen. So if you take away any one thing today, I hope it's this bullet right here that says that the NCRF supports nature-based projects that work to enhance the resilience of coastal communities and enhance habitat for fish and wildlife. And just to be clear, that's an and statement, it's not an or statement. So these nature-based projects need to be able to do both of these things. They need to enhance coastal resilience and they need to enhance fish and wildlife habitat. And we'll talk more about that as we move along. The interesting aspect about this program is that because it's the Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and that is a philanthropic arm of the government for conservation purposes, that organization is able to take in federal funding from agencies like NOAA and the Department of Defense and match those with additional private sector contributions from some of the partners that you see on screen. So they're able to pull in public and private dollars, which actually builds this pot up a lot more than it might have been if it was just federal. So something to note. In terms of geographic focus, this is a coastal program. So, your standard coastal environments. And I'm just going to ask folks, if you don't mind, can you just make sure you're on mute here while we're going through the presentation? But in terms of the geographic focus, like I mentioned, we've got the coastal communities across the country, as well as those along the coast of the Great Lakes Basin. So it's not just the Atlantic and the Pacific. We've got the Great Lakes included here. And you'll notice that these watersheds, or this eligibility footprint, actually extends pretty far inland for a lot of these communities. So technically speaking, the eligible areas for this grant are considered coastal Huc-8 watersheds that drain to the ocean or the Great Lakes, as well as adjacent Huc-8 watersheds that are low-lying or tidally influenced. So that's a very technical definition here. If you're looking for a much more accessible way to find out if you are eligible for this funding program, there is an interactive map that's online, and I will ask my colleague Courtney if maybe she can put the link in the chat for this footprint. But the link essentially will bring you to this, interactive GIS page where you can type in your address or your city or a landmark, and it will zoom in and show you whether or not you're in that orange eligibility area. And if you're just on the cusp, I would say to reach out, because sometimes it's a GIS issue, or maybe it's just not mapped correctly. If you're pretty far outside of that boundary, I would say it's probably safe to say that you aren't eligible. But I think we targeted it for this call so that folks who are on the call should very well be in this footprint. In terms of organizational eligibility, it's pretty much your standard players. So you've got state, tribal, and territorial agencies who are all eligible, local and municipal governments, regional governments or collaborations, nonprofits, educational institutions, and then there's some room for for-profit organizations like consulting firms, as well as any semi-federal partnerships. So those would be like a Sea grant would be applicable for this program. For folks who are not eligible, again, standard players. So this is a lot of federal dollars here. So federal agencies or federal employees are not eligible. It's a US program only, so no foreign entities or organizations and you cannot apply as an unincorporated individual. So again, I want to reiterate that the must-haves of this application are that every proposal really must invest in nature-based solutions that have clear benefits to community resilience and clear benefits to fish, wildlife, and habitat. And the second point, I think, can be a little vague for folks. So I want to unpack what we mean by community resilience a bit more. So on the community portion of that phrase, these proposals that folks are putting in really should work to enhance the resilience of critical community infrastructure. So whether that's roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, other assets or buildings that are along the coast or in that coastal watershed. When we say community, we mean people, assets, actual infrastructure, whether it's physical or social infrastructure that's in place that could be affected by coastal hazards. On the resilience piece of that phrase, we're talking resilience in the context of coastal climate hazards. So that would be obviously coastal flooding, erosion, sea and lake level change. It would be, potentially coastal storms, any hazards that are affecting communities on the coast and have an impact on that community's infrastructure and lifelines would be, a very clear fit for this program. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we move forward, because of course, all of the projects that you would be proposing have a lot of other benefits. And Sophie mentioned some of them earlier, from carbon sequestration to human health benefits. So we would just want to be clear in a proposal that the coastal flooding and resilience benefits are always the ones that are kind of front and center in a proposal. So those were your must-haves in an application. That's really what you want to focus on when you're putting together an application. But what you should also pay attention to are these kind of should-haves, or the other evaluation criteria that your projects would be evaluated on. And these are all built into the RFP. They're included in all of the different resources about the program. So this isn't the only place you'll see these. But these are really what make the most competitive proposals in the program. This is what makes them stand apart from the rest. So those proposals with meaningful and really strong community and partner engagement that loop in other organizations, that, if it's a nonprofit, they're working with the municipality and maybe other, regional organizations. That type of engagement is really compelling for this program. We like to see projects that are scaled to address the identified problem. So this is important because a lot of the hazards that your communities will be facing are significant in terms of geographic scope and scale. So we want to make sure that the projects that are being put forth and are being recommended in these proposals are really working to address those problems at the similar scale of the problem itself. So for example, if you've got a shoreline-wide problem, a pilot program that really is only kind of pinpointed in one location would not be as competitive as in this program. However, if you had a series of several different pilot projects and you were testing out different pilot techniques at scale across that entire shoreline, that would be much more compelling. And now you're really starting to address that problem at the scale at which it occurs. There's room for innovative techniques here. So it doesn't just need to be tried and true practices. You can try out different techniques as long as that's all described and grounded in your proposal. We always want to see, where possible, priorities that have come up in previous resilience or community planning activities. If those priorities are identified in those resilience plans and then they're called out in your proposal, that again tends to be very compelling because that shows that the community has gone through that kind of basic community planning process. They've identified, projects X, Y, and Z as key priorities. And now you're moving forward with projects X and Y because it's so important to the community. The transferability of techniques is also important here. So making sure that not only are projects operating at scale, but the lessons learned from those projects can actually be transferred to other communities and across the region at scale is very important. We want to see projects that have benefits to underserved communities. So through basic community engagement, that would mean, engaging folks in underserved communities, folks that have historically been excluded from the process, and doing so in a way that is meaningful and actually has some tangible benefit to the folks that you're engaging, as well as to, the plans that you're developing and the projects that you're putting forth. And then this last point here about budgets and cost-effective work plans, we're trying to make sure that every dollar spent is as cost-effective as possible. So there is a point at which you'd submit a pre-proposal for this program, and I'll talk about that shortly. At that point, you don't really need to go into too much detail about your project idea, but should you move forward to the full proposal, that's where we would need to see a detailed work plan that explains how these dollars would be spent for your project. All right, so next here I want to cover the different priority categories of this fund, and there are 4. And I would just want to make clear up front that in an application, you would only want to pick one priority category based on your desired outcome for the project. So we would definitely encourage folks, if you needed to start, from the kind of the first step here and just develop a plan before moving forward, the planning grant would be the best category for you, because that would lead to that development of a plan. If you've already done your plan, you've done all your design, and you're really just looking to put shovels in the ground and construct a project, then that last phase would be the most appropriate. We would not encourage proposals to come forward that are, start to finish design build projects, where you're planning, designing, and implementing all under one grant. If that was the case and you needed to go through all of those different steps, we would encourage you to apply for, the most basic one or the most preliminary step. And then if you were to be awarded, maybe come back a following year and reapply and get funded again under a different grant. So it's a pipeline that's intended to prepare you for the next stage, but it is not intended to kind of do everything all at once in one all-inclusive proposal. So that being said, you'll see that there's the planning grant, and then there are 3 project level grants. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes unpacking these and giving you some more information on each. So the first category, community capacity building and planning, as of last cycle, the 2022 grant cycle, awards tended to average anywhere between $100,000 and $1 million for this grant. And I should note there's no minimum or no maximum on this this category or any of the other 3. So you can request as little or as much as you feel like you need for your project, and all that would be explained in that budget. But this is the general range that we tended to see proposals coming in with in 2022. And I don't expect that to change much for 23. Again, the outcome of this category is a plan, a community plan, a resilience plan that's very infrastructure focused, very project focused, and it would lead to a list of prioritized nature-based strategies that would enhance community resilience and would enhance fish and wildlife habitat. So it wouldn't just be like a broad community visioning plan, similar to what would happen in a comprehensive plan process. This would be much closer to like an action plan, where you had specific actionable projects that could be then moved forward after the plan was complete. Some key components of this phase would be, of course, stakeholder engagement. So building capacity at the local or the state level, engaging different partners and communities that are affected by this project. And then again, planning projects that include nature-based features as the key component of what that project would look like in the future. And of course, this is still an early phase of a project, right? The planning phase, it lays out some potential options for nature-based solutions, but you would not be expected to know all of the details that you would then implement, 4 or 5 years later necessarily. This is just the point at which we would like folks to identify what those nature-based solutions might be and how they would enhance community resilience and fish and wildlife. So really starting to get a lay of the land. The next category here is site assessment and preliminary design, and it's the first of the 2 design categories. Awards, again, tend to average between 100,000 and 1 million. And the intended outcome here that you'd be working towards is a preliminary design of your project. And that would be anywhere between 30 or 60% design. Really, though, it would be getting you to the point of being able to make a go or no go decision on this project, right? Whether you would move forward based on all the information you have. So that can be in the form of, site assessment, preliminary design, and baseline monitoring, a feasibility study, really just determining whether or not this is the appropriate site for your project. Some other key components is that when you apply for this category, we really like to see that projects that you're seeking design for have been prioritized in some type of previous planning. So that could be through a previous NCRF grant, through the first category that I just covered. It could also be through other planning that you've already done in the community. It doesn't all need to be through NCRF. So if your project has been prioritized elsewhere, you've done some basic planning around it, this would be the natural next step, whether or not that happened in NCRF. Again, this is where you focus on specific assessment related to the site itself. Permitting conversations would be encouraged here. They should start to happen, but they don't need to be completed. And there would be some ability to do baseline monitoring here to show the effectiveness of your project on the back end. So this next one is the second design category. Again, 100,000 to $1 million. And the outcome here is final design and permitting. So you would apply to this category if you were seeking to get anywhere between 90 to 100% design in your project, and you were seeking to get permitting conversations well underway and really as completed as possible. And we know there are of course, timeline struggles there. Again, some key components of this one include that the projects that you bring into this phase should be prioritized elsewhere. They should have already undergone some sort of preliminary design, being brought to at least that 30 or 60% threshold. And you should be seeking to position your projects at the end of this grant to be as restoration ready as possible. So that would mean they're ready to actually undergo permitting. They've done some baseline monitoring, and by the end of this grant, you should be as close to putting the shovel to the ground as possible without actually doing that. And then the last category here is restoration and implementation. I'm looking right now, I think this just looking here, the average project length, I saw that wasn't on the past few categories. So I just wanted to share that for those, we're looking at anywhere between like a year or two. And the difference here is that for the restoration category, it could be anywhere up to 3 years for the project. So I just wanted to be clear on that. And then there would also be a year of monitoring on the back end. And I just want to make sure folks are muted because I'm hearing a little bit of an echo here. So let me see if I can figure that out quickly. But if you're not on mute, please be sure to do so. Okay, so the average award amount for this category is anywhere between $1 million to $10 million. So you see it starts to go up quite a bit once you get towards actual implementation. So this is the big grant. This is where folks will come in and request a lot more. Again, there's no minimum and no maximum, but this is where a lot of the funding will be expended for this program. The outcome, of course, is actual implementation of your project and then monitoring into that first year to make sure that you're reaching those outcomes and what you expected out of the baseline monitoring is all checking out. And this is where the other three categories, whether you have been funded under NCRF or you did all of this separately, this is where they all start to come together. So in this funding category, you'd want to see projects that have been prioritized elsewhere. You'd want to see complete site assessment and final design. And then there would really need to be a clear understanding of the permitting requirements and starting to actually apply for those permits in this phase. So I also want to give a sense of the general timeline for this program. And the little caveat here is that this is what the typical grant cycle looks like. We are just about to be entering the 2023 cycle. It will really happen any week now. So this is what the timeline generally looks like. There are no hard and fast dates though. So typically the RFP is released around late February, early March. So again, the next few weeks. And folks usually have about a month to a month and a half to put together pre-proposals that would then be due usually around mid-April. So I mentioned the pre-proposal earlier, and those are typically like a 2 to 3 page project narrative with not too much additional information that you would need to submit. So that is not an optional pre-proposal. It is required. You would have to submit that to be considered for funding. And those would be due, like I said, around mid-April. There's a review process that NIFWF undergoes to review those pre-proposals, and then invitations for full proposals are usually sent out in May. So in order to move forward after that pre-proposal phase, you would have to be invited to the full proposal to submit that more complete application. So invitations would be sent out in May, and full proposals are then usually due sometime in mid to late June. That process is a bit heavier. It's a 10 to 20 page project narrative with much more detail on the budget and the project work plan. But at that point, you'll have some more time to actually think about what that would entail, and you'd have some feedback on your pre-proposal that you could then include in a full proposal. Over the course of the summer, the review team goes through all of these proposals. They, do what they have to do, score them, and then awards are typically announced in November of that year. And then between November and the start of the next year, there's some administrative stuff that happens. The grants start to roll out, and then the entire process starts again the following year. So it is an annual grant. So I would say, don't feel rushed necessarily to submit for this upcoming cycle. We're constantly doing outreach to continue that pipeline. So folks are coming in, any year that is best suited for them. But do know that there is an RFP coming out in the very near future. So this could be a good time if you feel like you've got a project that might be a good fit. And throughout this entire process, wherever we are, knowing that we're at the start of this new cycle, but regardless, throughout the entire year, please do feel free to connect with our team as well as the folks at NIFWIF if you have questions on this program. It is always a good time to start thinking about a project, always a good time to start fleshing that out and putting some pen to paper and adding details so that our team and the folks at NIFWIF can react and get you some comments and start to help build that competitive proposal. So that is actually where I want to go next. The next portion here will actually discuss what you can do to get field liaison assistance and what that assistance actually looks like. So I mentioned, Throwe Environmental is a part of this program, or as the outreach part of this program rather. And we as field liaisons can support NCRF in a number of different ways. So we can promote the program through really broad outreach and engagement. So whether that's through, conferences or presentations, we can support the program through workshop discussions like this, as well as one-on-one sessions with folks who are actually thinking about applying. So if you had a project idea, outside of this this workshop, or if you come up with one today that you'd like to discuss further, you can absolutely reach out to our team and we can think through that idea in detail with you. We can discuss areas for, more attention or areas where we feel like, you're coming in at a really strong point and discuss how that proposal would develop. For folks that submit the proposal and they are not selected for funding, we can provide follow-up and feedback on why those proposals were not selected. And that tends to be pretty useful for folks, I find. I know a lot of grant programs don't necessarily do that. So I would highly encourage you to take advantage of that if you do submit and are not selected. And then for folks that are selected, we can provide support there through check-ins and troubleshooting and really just making sure that, things are on track. So I'm going to unpack each one of these a bit more here. So I mentioned that we can engage on specific project ideas. And we'll start to ask questions, and you'll see this when we go into our breakout rooms in a little bit. We'll ask questions about your idea or the outline for your pre-proposal that really start to get at some of the core elements of this funding program. So we'll ask you, does your proposal align the priorities of your project with the priorities of the program? And especially for nature-based projects, I think there are a lot of different, ecosystem services and different benefits that can come out of these nature-based solutions. So it is really important to make sure you are highlighting first and foremost the coastal resilience and the flood reduction benefits of your projects. Knowing that there are several other co-benefits that will come with it, you really do want to highlight the flooding benefits front and center, because those are the benefits that are most central to this program, and those are the ones that your projects will be reviewed on. So always important to highlight those. And it's not just the flood reduction, it's dual benefits here. So there's also the need to show the fish and wildlife benefit as well. We'll ask you whether you're operating at scale. We'll help you think about different partners that you can engage to develop your idea further, and to just flesh it out a bit more, to make sure that you're engaging different stakeholders within the community. We'll help you, if we feel like you aren't there yet, or there needs to be a little bit more work done, we can help you more clearly articulate the coastal hazards that you're facing. So making sure that that is clear for the reviewers, knowing that, they're reviewing proposals across the country. So it is important to make sure they have a good understanding of how these coastal hazards are affecting your community specifically. And we'll also help you, work towards a proposal that is pushing your project in the direction of implementation. knowing that this fund is very implementation focused, even if you're applying at the planning or the design phase. And overall, we'll just help you, get to the point where you're making a strong case for NCRF investment. And I think, at the end of the day, you're trying to sell these projects to your reviewers. They don't know about your projects otherwise most of the time. So it is important to make sure, start to finish, you're making a good case for why this program should invest funding into your project. I did mention follow-up here. So again, if you're invited to a full proposal, we can help you, between the pre-proposal and the full proposal stage, we can help you think about how to continue building your ideas, how to address any gaps that you might have, and really how to leverage the opportunities and the strong suits of your proposal to develop a really competitive application. If you were not selected for funding, either at the pre-proposal or the full proposal stage, we can help you rework that idea a bit more for the next year and help you answer questions about where it may need to better align with the RFP. We can also work with the folks at NIFWIF to get a little bit of feedback from their review team, and we're happy to review some of that with you and actually provide some, real on the ground guidance as to what might need to change if you were to decide to resubmit. And then lastly here, we can provide some support to folks who are existing grantees. So if you have been awarded either in the past or if you're awarded in this upcoming cycle, we can help you think about how you're meeting your proposed outcomes, whether you're on time or on budget. And if there are any concerns there, we can work through those with you. We can talk about any monitoring targets that you might be working towards. And then if there are unexpected issues, and this comes up a lot with things like permitting, and if there's development nearby, things like that, we can help troubleshoot there and help you figure out kind of where this project keeps going moving forward. Another opportunity is that because there are those 4 different funding categories, the program operates like a pipeline. So if you submit a project this year for planning, and it's a 2-year grant, and by 2025, you're about ready to complete that project, we would want to have a discussion about where the project goes next. And would you consider reapplying for NCRF to now do that design, or to move the project forward even further? So it doesn't all need to happen through this program, but there's always an appetite to continue moving projects forward where possible. And I did want to cover a few kind of tips and tricks for building a successful proposal. So I tend to think this happens before, during, and after the writing process. So in the before stage, before you even put pen to paper, I really feel like it's all about picking the right project and proposal for this program. So this is the point at which you'd want to develop your idea a little bit, working with your partners and working with the community, and setting a clear understanding of what the goals, objectives, timeline, and responsibilities are for your project, right? And really just kind of laying the groundwork with that basic information. And at that point, once you have a plan for success, you would start to ask, is this program the right fit for you? And you look at the eligibility, you look at the match requirements, which I will talk about shortly. You look at the award amounts and the different types of projects that have typically been funded. And then I think it's that point where you make your first decision, does the program fit your needs for the project? And can you make a compelling case for the project that you're seeking to move forward? And again, I think nature-based solutions are interesting because there are so many co-benefits here. So you should be asking yourselves, can I make a competitive case for this? And would this, really compete at a national scale in this funding program? And if you have questions about that and you're not sure the answer to that question, this is where you would connect with our team as field liaisons to start to ask those questions of us, and we can help you decide, whether or not it's worth the effort of putting together a proposal. While you're actually writing, I think it's really about communicating your project and the specific benefits of your project. Writing does set the tone here. Again, you're selling your project to reviewers, so you would need to demonstrate the challenges and the hazards that you're facing, the need that you have for the project and for the funding, and how the funding itself would help address that need in the context of those hazards. So don't leave any assumptions there. Don't leave any stone unturned. Make sure that in your proposal, you're really explaining that start to finish, because again, you're selling the project to reviewers. They don't necessarily know your project. So make sure that you're communicating it in a complete way. You'd want to be sure to adapt to the grant. And I think this is true with any grant, as are a lot of these tips. There are certain things that this program really really emphasizes. So knowing that there are multiple benefits to many of these projects, adapt, be flexible, pay attention to the keywords in the RFP, and frame your project in a way that focuses on the resilience and the fish and wildlife benefits. This is where I would also encourage you to build partnerships. So for example, if you're an agency and a municipality that does a lot of nature-based work, you're doing the on-the-ground work, but you maybe don't have the community engagement piece as shored up, right? Maybe that's not something that your department does a lot. I would say to look across the municipality and look at other departments, or to look at nonprofits that you might be able to engage with, to make sure that you're really coming at this from a community, social science lens and an on the ground, infrastructure, physical science lens, so that you're getting both aspects of that, and you can really speak to the community resilience and the fish and wildlife benefits of your project. If you have trouble with that, again, this is a recurring theme here. Be sure to connect with our team as field liaisons. We can help you think through who to connect with and how to do so. And then the last part, after you're done writing, when you're right about ready to hit send, I would say, of course, reread, revise, after you've taken a break and, take a day, put it down for a second, go through it, make sure you're comfortable with how the proposal reads, have some colleagues read it, make sure there's a strong title and an abstract. It's not the most important thing, but I do think it communicates, what your project is about in an elevator pitch type of way. So make sure that that's clear. And I would say one of the more important things to do is compare what you have written back to the program criteria, right? So look at the RFP, treat it like a rubric, and think about, if you were a reviewer for this program, how would you score your project? And does it feel like it meets the requirements of the RFP? If it does, I think you're moving in the right direction. If you feel like there are still some questions there, think about how you can answer those. And then lastly, if you do not get funded, that's okay. It's an annual program. So I would say recycle, adapt your proposal, whether it's for this fund or another one, solicit some feedback, get comments from folks. If there are areas that you feel like just weren't strong enough the following year, think about how you can address those. And with the help of from the field liaisons or from some others, think about how to rework that proposal and make it a bit stronger for the following cycle. So quickly, I just wanted to show who the actual people are on our team. I talked about the field liaisons a few times. So you've got myself as well as several of my colleagues. They work across the country, and we can, you'll meet a few of these folks today, but we can also put you in contact with those that are the best fit for your specific region. But we've got a good looking team, so we got to show off our pictures whenever we can. And then in terms of other partners, it's not just the team at Throwe Environmental. We've got some partner organizations across the country. So specifically when we're working with tribes and native communities, we have the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society to help provide additional support to those folks. And then we also have some capacity building support from the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. And both of those organizations work nationally. So quickly, I think with the last few minutes before we go on a break, I want to just discuss some specific opportunities for this network. Knowing that this is a big grant, I think we can kind of distill it all down to what makes the most sense and what would resonate the most for folks in this network. So there's a really interesting tool that this program has. And Courtney, I'm going to ask you again to put the link in the chat. This tool is called the Coastal Resilience Evaluation and Siting Tool, and it's a big GIS mapper. And essentially they overlay three different types of data. And that data is focused on natural and open spaces, community exposure to coastal hazards, and fish and wildlife benefits or fish and wildlife assets. And what they do is they do these regional assessments to catch all this data. And then they put it all together in order to facilitate better decision-making and better prioritization around which areas in these different regions would be most ripe for these resilience projects for the NCRF program. So they add the open space and the community resilience data and the fish and wildlife data all together, and they develop what they call resilience hubs. And essentially those are hotspots where they feel like resilience projects would be really well suited. So it's an ongoing process. Almost every region in the country is done. The Great Lakes is still coming soon. I believe those will happen hopefully by the end of this cycle. And you'll see the link is going to be put in the chat, and I also pasted it on this slide here. It's resilientcoast.org. But on this next slide, you'll get a better sense of how this all works together. So here you'll see Rhode Island and Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And the first image has a bunch of different open space areas that have been overlaid on this map. The second one has a community exposure index. So you'll notice that some of the more municipal areas, the more urban areas that are highly populated, those will be the ones with highest community exposure. And then you'll see the fish and wildlife index, where the darker pinks are areas with higher amounts of vulnerable fish and wildlife species and habitats. When you overlay all of that, you get these resilience hubs, with the darkest colors being where projects would be most, or I guess the highest priority, and carry the most potential resilience benefits. So the reason I bring this up is, number one, because this is an optional tool. So I would say use it at your discretion and use it where it benefits your proposal. If yours is not in a resilience hub, that does not mean you're not eligible. You certainly could be. This is, again, for your benefit only. But I bring it up because this layer about open space really, I think, benefits folks working in forests and cities, in urban forested areas. Knowing that you have large contiguous properties with open space, knowing that you're in urban areas that have high community exposure, and knowing that you very likely have significant fish and wildlife benefits on the lands that you're working on, I tend to feel like that tends to make for a resilience hub here or there. So I would take advantage of this tool, use it where possible, and really showcase why the parcel that you're working on could be such a good fit. So a couple more things to cover quick here. I wanted to hit on match. So match was not required in 2022. It previously was before the 2022 cycle, but it was not last year. It was still expected. It was still encouraged because it shows that level of commitment from a community, but there were no restrictions around match percentage. You could come in with as little or as much as you felt you were able to with your project. It could be cash match, it could be in kind, volunteer time, it could be land that you're donating, but it must fall within the period of performance, and it cannot be federal match. You can include federal leverage in your proposal to kind of describe what skin in the game you have from other federal pots, but it would not be able to count as match. So we do not know what the match will look like for the 2023 cycle yet. I tend to find that these RFPs don't change much year to year, but we don't know what that will mean for match. So take this with a grain of salt, but I did want to flag what match looked like in the 2022 cycle. All right, and the last two slides here are, before we open it up for questions and a quick break, are some examples of projects that have been funded that are applicable to this group. So the first is the Cleveland Harbor Eastern Embayment Resilience Study, and it's called the CHEERS project. And this project has actually been awarded twice. First in 2019, then again in 2021 for preliminary and final design. The grantee was Cleveland Metro Parks, a metropolitan park organization, several of which are in place across Ohio. It should not say Washington, it should say Ohio there. But the award, the first one was $125,000, the second was $985,000. And essentially the project worked to create 80 acres of inshore and nearshore habitat on the Lake Erie coastline to expand and build new parkland that really worked to protect several valuable community assets. So that includes the interstate right near the coast, several fish and wildlife habitats right nearby, as well as 3,500 residents in an underserved community on the opposite side of that highway. So, using nature-based solutions, developing new forested and park areas to protect the folks and the assets on shore. And the second one here is in Jacksonville, Florida, awarded in 2020. This was a $4.3 million restoration project titled Restoring Stream, Wetlands, and Floodplains of McCoy's Creek. This one was restoring the creek, including a mile of stream and about 35 acres of floodplain and wetlands. There were several different nature-based features and materials that were used on this one, all for the benefit of several different critical species in the region. So you'll see several species of shrimp, fish, I believe there was also some birds in there as well. And The project would use that restoration, which included, again, those nature-based features, including some hardwood restoration, as well as freshwater ponds and salt marsh, all to better enhance the flood retention ability of that area and to protect those fish and wildlife habitats. So with that, I think we can pause here, see if there are any questions, general questions at this point. We can then go on a short break, and then we will regroup to ask more specific project-focused questions in our breakout rooms. But for the time being, I will open the floor for any general questions, and if folks want to unmute or raise their hand, either one works. All right, I'm not hearing a lot of general questions, so that's okay because we'll have plenty of time to ask more project-specific ones once we get in the breakouts. So that being said, why don't we plan to take a break? We can